Good morning, everyone. Perek Zayin Mishna Hey. Shtei kupos, 2 boxes. Achas shel truma va'achas shel chulin. One is truma, one contains truma, one contains chulin. Regular grain, everything's been taken from it, ready to eat. Shenafla sa'ah truma l'seich achas mehen. A sa'ah of truma fell into one of the boxes. Ve'ein yadua la'ezeh mehen nafla. We don't know to which one it fell in. We know a sa'ah of truma fell. We don't know which box it fell into. If it fell into the box with truma, no problem. If it fell into the box with the chulin, then assuming, which is the assumption of the case of the Mishnah, that you don't have 100 times more than the sa'ah that fell in, so then you're going to have, if it fell into the chulin, you're going to have meduma. You're going to have a mixture of truma and chulin. The truma wasn't nullified. It's going to be forbidden to anybody other than a kohen. So what do we do in this case? Harei ani oimer, I am able to say, the seich shel truma nafla, this fell into the truma box. Okay, now, before we explain the halacha at the end, that I can assume that it fell into the truma box, one can ask, perhaps we can figure out which box it fell into by measuring the contents of the box. If we knew how much was in each box beforehand, then we measure and we see that one has a sa'ah more, then we know which box it fell into. And the answer is yes, that could be a way of determining, but in our Mishnah, the case is where you didn't measure the contents of each box beforehand, and therefore going ahead and measuring is not going to help you. If you see one has a sa'ah more than the other, I shouldn't say that. It's not going to help you because of the fact that without knowing how much the contents were before, you don't know which one became greater or not, which one now has that extra sa'ah. So this is the setup of the case. I can't measure the boxes to know which one it fell in, and I'm stuck. I don't know which one it fell into. So the halacha says, the Mishnah says, I can assume it fell into the truma. I'm allowed to make that assumption. And once I make that assumption that it fell into the truma box, then the chulin box is fine. It can be eaten by anyone. So it's very clear, what's the basis? What basis do we have to go ahead and assume that we can say that it fell into the truma and be lenient? And the answer is that we are dealing with a situation, and this could really be the only situation where this halacha would be possible, and that is that nowadays, or even in times of the Mishnah, after the destruction of the second Beis HaMikdash, truma in Eretz Yisrael is midrabanan. There's no Torah obligation to give truma even nowadays. Without having a Beis HaMikdash, without having the majority of the Jewish people living in Eretz Yisrael, depending on which opinion you follow, truma is not a Torah obligation nowadays. It's a Rabbanan obligation. It's a rabbinic obligation. And if it's a rabbinic obligation, based on the Gemara in Psachim, we can say here, we can apply here the rule, Safek D'Rabbanan Lahakel. When we have a question about a rabbinic law, we are able to be lenient. We have situations, we have a rule, we can be lenient. Now, again, you have to know how to apply that rule. But over here, the Gemara applies that rule. The reason why we can assume that it fell into the truma one is because if it falls into the truma one, then we can be lenient. If it falls into the chulin one, then we have to be stricter, because then we have to make it forbidden, because it's meduma. So therefore, being that here the whole question is involving truma midrabanan, truma that's only rabbinic obligation, by nature it's only rabbinic. Therefore, we can now be lenient following the rule. And when it comes to doubts in rabbinic law that we can be lenient, we can apply that here and assume that it fell into the truma box. Okay, so that is the halacha of the Mishnah. Now, it's also very important to qualify this halacha, as the Bartanura speaks out, and that is that in this case we have. The case of the Mishnah is, one is boxes, we have one box of truma, one box of chulin, the sa'ah of truma fell in, we don't know which box it fell into. But the case is a case clearly where if I say that it fell into the truma box, nothing's affected. The truma is fine, the box of truma is fine because that just has more truma in it. And, I'm sorry, if I go ahead and I say that it fell into the truma box, then I have a situation where I'm fine. The Truma's fine, the Chulin's fine. If I say I fell into the Chulin, then I have a problem with the Chulin. So basically what happens is that when I have the right to make the assumption that I fell into the Truma, it comes out at the end that nothing's affected. The Truma stays the same, the Chulin stays the same, I'm good. But let's say the case was not that one box is Truma, one box is Chulin. Let's say one box is Chulin, one box is Tevel. That means there's a box of grain that the Truma, the Meiser, hasn't been taken from it yet. Now the question is, which box did the Sa'ah of Truma, of real Truma, of full-fledged Truma fall in? Did it fall into the Chulin box or into the Tevel box? Now, it would be very convenient to say it fell into the Tevel box and leave the Chulin alone. And the Chulin will be fine. I already have a Tevel box. I have a box that's already forbidden. I have a box that's already forbidden to anyone. I have a box of Chulin. If I go ahead and I say that the Sa'ah of Truma fell into the box of Tevel, I'll at least save the Chulin. The problem is that if I say that the Truma fell into the Tevel, that box is going to get messed up. Because at the end of the day, even if after I separate what I was supposed to separate before the Truma fell in, I make it Chulin, but now that the Truma fell in, it becomes Meduma. So whether I say the Truma fell into the Chulin, it makes it Meduma. If it falls into the Tevel, it makes it Meduma. In that situation, I don't have a right to go ahead and say, well, I'll assume it fell into the Tevel, so at least the Chulin one will be okay. I can't do that. You have no right then to go ahead and say, I can't go that far to be lenient in rabbinic law and to go ahead and pick one box over the other when either one of them is affected the same way. In the case of our Mishnah, one is Truma, one is Chulin, and I assume that the Truma fell into the Truma box. Then everything's fine. Then nothing's affected. Everything stays the same. But in this case, one of them is going to have to be affected. So to go ahead, I have no right. One of them is going to be affected negatively. Either one is going to become a duma if I say the Truma fell into it. So to say it fell into one and to save the other, I have no right to do that. There's no basis to say one over the other. And therefore, at the end of the day, I'm left with a safek. I'm left with a doubt. Both of them become a duma, because I don't know which one the box of Truma fell into. And we are talking about where there's not 100 times more against the Truma that fell in any of the boxes. And therefore, whichever one I say it fell into is going to become a duma. And therefore, I have the right to say it fell into one more than the other. And therefore, both of them then would remain a duma. Both of them would be considered a mixture of Truma and Chulin. And that we have to deal with it according to the laws of Meduma. Okay, that is the first case of the Mishnah. Now we have the next case of the Mishnah. Ein yadua ezehi shel truma ve'ezehi shel chulin. Here's a new case. I have two boxes. I know one is truma, I know one is chulin, but I don't know which one is which. Ochal achas mehen. And a person went and ate from one of the boxes. We're not talking about anything falling in now. That was the first case. The case here right now, I have two boxes. One is Truma, one is Chulin. I don't know which one is which. And now you went and you ate one of them. Person went and ate one of those boxes. So we say, Potter. In this case, he's exempt. Now we have here a case. We're talking about he ate it accidentally. And we really have here with a doubt. Did this person eat Truma unintentionally or not? If he ate the Truma box, then he has eaten Truma unintentionally, and he has to pay Karen V'chaimish. He has to take grain and replace the principal plus a fifth with the grain that he gives, which will turn into Truma, as we're discussing until now. But if he ate the Chulin one, then he doesn't have to do that. So what do we say here? Potter, he's exempt. He doesn't have to pay the Karen. He doesn't have to pay the Chaimish. Because what we have here is a question. Did he eat the Kohen's Truma or not? That means we're left here with a situation. Do I owe this to the Kohen? Do I owe this to the Kohen? I don't owe it to the Kohen. Well, when there's a question of do I owe it to a Kohen or not, so anytime there's a question, if I owe you money or not, if you have a right to take money from me or not, the burden of proof is on the person who wants to take away the money. So here you're trying to tell me that I should have to give away my Chulin plus in order to replace the Karen and the Chomesh. It's not upon me to prove it. It's upon the Kohen to prove it. let's say, again, we're talking about, let's say this was the box of Truma belonged to a specific Kohen. So there's someone to deal with specifically. At the end of the day, that Kohen is the one who's going to have to prove that I have to give him I have to give him the Keren and then give the Chumash to any Kohen that I want to give to. If the burden of proof is on the Kohanim, and therefore we say that you're exempt. Now, this still needs some explanation, because we know that if a person eats Truma unintentionally, and he does it even before he gives it to a Kohen, the halacha is he's got to replace this Truma with other grain, replacing the principal plus a fifth. That's the halacha. So the question is, and that is something that you have to do if eating Truma inadvertently. So it's true that from the point of a specific Kohen owning this grain, and he wants to demand what was his, the burden of proof is upon him. You want to take money from someone, the burden of proof is on you. But here we have a different law. Besides giving back the Kohen his money, the fact, as we've been discussing until now, that you have to actually replace the principal with other grain that turns into Truma, and you have to add a fifth. We're not only dealing with a monetary payment, we're dealing with basically what the Torah says here. The Torah says you need an atonement for what you did. And the atonement comes by taking grain, replacing with this grain, the grain that you ate, because this grain turns into Truma plus a fifth. There's an atonement here that you have to go through. How is the atonement part taken care of just because I don't know if I did eat Truma or not? Not knowing if I ate Truma or not is enough to say I don't have a monetary obligation. But what about the atonement that I need? And even if I'm in doubt, whether I did something wrong, we find in the place of the Torah, when you're in doubt, you still need an atonement. So how does this atonement, how does this kapara, how does this atonement been taken care of? The aspect of kapara, that when you eat Truma unintentionally, you have to replace it. You have to take grain and use that grain to replace what you ate plus a fifth. How is that being taken care of? So there's a number of interesting answers given, and I'm just going to basically list the possible answers. One answer is that you're right, that in order to be able to gain kapara atonement for what you did, you need to take grain from your grain chulin, designated as the possible replacement for the principal that you ate, and for the fifth that you have to pay. But then you don't have to give it to any Kohen. There's no Kohen who has a right. Even if no Kohen ever owned this, then there's no Kohen to demand it. And being that it's a suffix, it's a doubt, no one said there's no obligation that you have to go to a Kohen and give it. You've already had gained your atonement by the fact that you separated Truma to replace. And there's no Kohen even the Kohen who actually may have owned the Truma that you ate, that you possibly ate. Again, he has no right to demand anything here, because who says he has a right to demand anything? From the point of my atonement, I've gained my atonement by separating a grain to cover the principal and the fifth. I gained my atonement. And that's it. Now, at the end of the day, though, but I got to treat this like Truma. What am I going to do with it? The answer is you can sell it to a Kohen. Since no Kohen has a right to demand it from you, you want to hold on to that Truma, hold on to it. You want to sell it, sell it. But the point is going to be that no Kohen has a right to demand it from you, even the Kohen who may have owned that Truma that you possibly ate. However, you're going to have to do something to be able to gain the atonement for eating the Truma. Others say that the atonement is gained just by taking care of the principal. You don't have to take care of the fifth. There is the atonement, and you don't need that extra fifth for the atonement. That's like a penalty. And therefore, from the point of atonement, you separate enough grain to cover the principal, your atonement is accomplished. So according to the second opinion, all you need to do is separate the principal, you don't have to separate the fifth, and you can go ahead and take that principal and sell it to a Kohen because there's no one else who can do anything with it. The third opinion is that when the Torah says that when you eat Truma unintentionally, you have to give the principal and the fifth, that is not an atonement. It's not. But rather, it's like any other gift that we give to the Kohen. The Torah mandates us to give certain gifts to the Kohen. The Truma that we give is a gift. There's certain parts of an animal that we slaughter that is a gift. That's called matnes kahuna. There's certain gifts that the Torah told us to give to the Kohen. Those gifts are generally treated like any other obligation of money. if there is a question if I have to give this gift to the Kohen, then the same way if he wanted to take money from me, the burden of proof is on him. The same thing applies to any of the matlas kahuna, any of the gifts that we give to the Kohen. The burden of proof is on the Kohen. We treat it, even though it's not a monetary obligation, it's a mitzvah to do, but we find that we treat it like a monetary obligation. Here too, when the Torah says if you eat truma accidentally, you have to replace it with grain, replacing the principal and adding a fifth, that is another one of the kahuna gifts. That's another one of the gifts that we give to a Kohen. It's given in this case to replace what was taken, but its nature is it's a matles kahuna. It's one of the gifts of the kahuna. And therefore, like any other gifts of the kahuna, it follows monetary law. And in this case, where we have a doubt whether I have to give it back to whether I have to give it to the Kohen, it follows just like if there was a question if I owed money to the Kohen has burden of proof upon him to say that I have to give it to him. So too, when it comes to any of the gifts to the Kohen that we give, it all follows the monetary rules. And since there's a suffix here, a doubt here, if I even ate truma, the burden of proof is on him completely. I don't have to do anything because there's no atonement here being done. It's a question of, do I have to give this to the Kohen? If there is a doubt, the burden of proof is upon him. And without that proof, I don't have to do anything. Okay. Now, so in the case of one box was chulin, one box was truma, and you ate one of them, putter, then you're going to be exempt from anything. Now, what happens to the other box? The other box, we don't know. Did you eat chulin? This is truma. Did you eat truma? This is chulin. Noyegba, but truma, you have to treat it like truma. It's a suffix. It's a question. Is this truma or not? And in this kind of situation, I can't be lenient and say I don't have to do it. I have to be strict with it, and I have to treat it like truma, which means a non-Kohen can't eat it, and I'm not allowed to let it become tabi, become rich, become impure. Nonetheless, v'chayeves b'chala. If this grain is chayev in chala, which means if I take the box that was left over, I don't know if it's truma, I don't know if it's chala. I grind into flour, I make a dough. Now, if it is truma, I don't have to separate chala to give to the Kohen. If it was chulin, then it's like any other dough. I have to make a separation to give to the Kohen. But here, I don't know what it is. Is it truma? Is it chulin? Says the Mishna, v'chayeves b'chala. Being that it's possible that it could be chulin, you have to separate chala from this. Because being that I don't know what this is, I have to adopt the stringencies of both. Maybe it's truma, so I got to be stringent, following the stringencies of truma. Somebody's not a Kohen, can't eat it. But there's a stringency that also follows if it's chulin, which is separating challah if I make a dough out of it. And therefore, the Mishnah says I have to deal with both stringencies in this case. Divrei Rabbi Meir, these are the words of Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yosei Paiter. Rabbi Yosei says, no, we're exempt. Rabbi Yosei has a very interesting explanation here. His explanation is that we know, we had this before. I believe we had it before. Maybe not. But the halacha is that if, let's say, you have meduma, you have the grain that it's a mixture of chulin and truma. There's not enough chulin to nullify the truma. So it's a mixture. That's what it's left being. It's a mixture of truma and chulin. Okay, so now what happens? The Kohen takes it, right? The Kohen is the only one who can do anything with it. The Kohen takes it, grinds it into flour, makes it into a dough. Right? And maybe this grain is chulin. Some of it is chulin, some of it is chulin, some of it is challah. How do you deal with truma in that case? I have chulin here. And if I have chulin here, how can what do I do about challah? So the Mishnah in Demai says that meduma, you don't have to separate challah. That's the law. Once it becomes meduma, I don't have to separate challah. And again, we're talking about situations where all these cases that we're dealing with are dealing with truma derabanan, challah derabanan. Being that's derabanan, the possibilities for the leniencies are there. And therefore, by meduma, which actually is in itself, as we've learned, a rabbinic law, because really if you have the majority should nullify it. It's the sages who institute 100 times more. So to call it forbidden now, it's midrabanan, it's rabbinic. And therefore, it's here that the rabbi said that by meduma, you don't have to separate challah. Okay, you don't have to separate challah. Again, dealing with where everything that we're dealing with here is a question of the Rabbanan, as we've explained. So Rabbi Yossi therefore says the same way meduma is exempt from challah, So to this case, where I have a box, I don't know what it is. Is it chulin? Is it truma? I have to, because of the doubt, I have to be strict. And because I have to be strict, I can't eat it. That's the same thing as meduma. It's just another form. It's not the exact form of it fell in. But at the end, I'm left with a question. Is this chulin? Is this truma? So therefore, that's considered, basically says that's the same thing like meduma. And therefore, challah doesn't have to be separated. And that's what we pass. That's what we follow. And again, we're talking about where everything that we're dealing with here is only, again, rabbinic in nature. Okay. Ochal acheres hashniya putra. Now, let's say somebody ate the other box. Okay, this is our case. One box was chulin, one box was truma. Reuben ate one box. We don't know which one he ate. Now Shimon came. He ate the other box. Okay. So how do we look at him? So the Mishna says he's exempt because look, we don't know what he ate. Did he eat the chulin? Did he eat the truma? Now between the two of them, one of them ate it, but we don't know which one ate it. So he has his. So by him it's a doubt. By him it's a doubt. By both of them it's a doubt, and therefore there is no way to obligate them to go ahead and have to replace the truma and the keren. It's a doubt which one he ate. It's a doubt which one he ate. Both of them have a doubt. And when there's a doubt, it's incumbent upon the Kohen to prove that it should go to him. And therefore, both of them are going to be exempt. But they're going to be exempt. Here, too, there's a really interesting idea. And that is that in order to say that we can exempt both of them, if let's say they together came to a rabbi, and told the rabbi there was one set that we had in front of, we had one box that was truma, one box that was chulin. We don't know which one was which. We both ate one box, and we don't know which one we ate. But so it's happened in this case right now. They're posing their question together. If we pose the question together, if they pose their question together, we have to look at the whole picture. And in the whole picture, one of these two guys ate it. We can't ignore it and say, well, maybe you ate and maybe you ate. If the question is posed as one, then I have to look at both of them as one, and one of them for sure ate it. And therefore, if they both came together to pose the question, then I have to go ahead and basically say, okay, between the two of you, you got to do what you got to do. Between the two of you, you are going to have to each give a half to cover the principal, to cover the chomesh. Now, at the end of the day, or well, it's going to depend on what we discussed until now. At the end of the day, they got to do something. Between the two of you, one of you ate the truma. We can't ignore that. Okay, so now you got to do something. Now, yeah, you got to go ahead and do something. One second. Yeah. At the end of the day, you're going to go ahead between the two of them. They're going to have to cover the principal and the fifth, and it'll go to a Kohen. Because right now, we know that there was truma eaten. Or we have to look at truma being eaten. And therefore, together, because they each have this question upon them, together they're going to go ahead and replace the principal and the fifth, and it's going to go to a Kohen, because judging how things are right now, we have to assume that there is an obligation of truma here. We have to assume, we have to see an obligation of truma here, of replacing the truma here, and it just continues like an obligation. Only the Mishnah that said both of them can be exempt is only when they come and present their questions differently. One guy ate the box one day, and he went to the rabbi and he said, what do I do? You're exempt. The other guy went ahead and ate the other box a different day or a different time, and he goes, or whatever, he goes to the rabbi and he asks a question, what do I do? As long as each one of them comes and asks his question separately, then the judge just looks at each one on its own, and you're left with a doubt on each one. Even if you know that at the end of the day, even if you know that both boxes were eaten by someone, but if the question that comes before the judge, before the rabbi, before the person who's dealing with the question, if there's only one there and in front of the Rav there is just a doubt, if there's just a doubt, then each one gets treated as a doubt. Doesn't make a difference if you happen to maybe know it comes out that one of them ate. That's not going to make a difference when one comes and I'm judging one. Okay, one is in front of me. He's the only one I judge. But looking at him alone, there is a doubt, there's a subject, there's a doubt, and therefore he's exempt. Achal echad eshteyin. Now, in this case, one person ate both boxes. We know he ate truma. The problem is we don't know which box was truma, which box was chulin. One of the boxes had more than the other. So we know he ate truma. We don't know which box is truma, the bigger box or the smaller box. So he for sure has an obligation for eating truma inadvertently, but based on how much? And the answer is mishalem kikatana shabishteyan. He pays like the smaller box. The smaller box is the only box that we know this is an amount of truma that was eaten. Okay? Because at the end of the day, we know he ate truma. We know that if the smaller box was truma, that's what he ate. If the bigger box was the truma one, so he for sure ate this amount, the same amount, but maybe more. So the amount that we know that for sure that he went ahead and he ate, he's got to replace it. He's got to give it to the Kohen. It's like anything else. The extra amount, the amount that would have been if the truma was the bigger box, that is the same as before. That's a question. Is this extra amount, was it chulin, was it truma? It's a doubt. And if it's a doubt, we say he's exempt. And depending on how you learn what exempt means, as we said before, the three options, the three opinions, that would apply here to the extra amount of the larger box, or it to have been the truma one. Okay. That was a heavy Mishna. Okay. The mitzvahs today are quite simple. Mitzvahs prohibition against doing work on the first day of Pesach. Whenever we talk about the word malacha, work, which typically starts when we discuss the laws of Shabbos, there are 39 forms of work which the Torah prohibits to do on Shabbos. They and their corollaries are all forbidden from the Torah. That is the definition of malacha. On the first day of Pesach, we have a prohibition. We're not allowed to do malacha, not allowed to do work. We know that when it comes to Yontif, there is an exception, and that is whatever I need for food preparation. There are certain forms of malacha that I can't do on Shabbos that I could do on Yontif for food preparation, like cooking. But that's the exception when it comes to Yontif. But again, there's a prohibition to do malacha. The prohibition to do activity, the kind of activity that's forbidden to do on Shabbos, it's forbidden to do on Yontif. The exceptions are the exceptions. But we have a prohibition to do malacha on the first day of Pesach. Shenema, as it says, on the 15th day of Nisan, you shall not do any work of labor, and that's the prohibition of doing the things that are forbidden to do on Yontif. The Torah only talks about the first day of Pesach because according to Torah law, we only have one day of Pesach. The first day of Pesach, there's only one day at the beginning of Pesach. Outside of Eretz Yisrael, we have 2 days, which rabbinically we have to keep like the first day. This applies in all places, at all times, both by men and by women. Next mitzvah. Prohibition against doing work on the 7th day of Pesach. As it says, on the 7th day, Mikra Kodesh, it'll be a calling of holiness, a convocation of holiness. Any work of labor you shall not do. Applies in all places at all times, both by men and women. Next mitzvah. Prohibition against doing malacha work on Shavuos. As it says, you shall call on this very day, referring to the 50th day from the counting of the Omer, Mikra Kodesh Yalachem, a convocation of holiness shall be for you. Any work of labor you shall not do. Applies in all places and all times, both by men and by women. 2 more. Prohibition against doing malach on Rosh Hashanah, as it says, in the 7th month on the first day, any work of labor you shall not do. Applies in all places, at all places and all times, both by men and by women. The last one, prohibition against doing work on Yom Kippur, as it says, Regarding Yom Kippur, the Torah says any work shall not be done. You may not do. In place, in all places, at all times. In all places, at all times. Have a good Chodesh, a wonderful Chodesh Tov, a wonderful Shabbos, and all the best.